Good afternoon and welcome everyone to ARC's weekly fireside chat. Today is, or this month, April, is Second Chance Month, and this week we will be shining a light on giving formerly incarcerated people stable, dignified, and diversified employment opportunities. I'm super pleased to introduce three incredible, amazing human beings, and yes, I did say you use a double accent there. So first, I'd like to introduce Jeffrey Korzenik, author and chief investment strategist at one of the country's largest banks. Genevieve Martin, executive director of Dave's Killer Bread Foundation, and Emily Blake, smart justice program officer at Michelson 20MM Foundation. So could we go, Emily, how are you today? And could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work at Michelson?
Sure. Thank you so much, Sam. As Sam mentioned, my name is Emily Blake. I have the immense privilege and pleasure of serving as Michelson 20MM's Smart Justice Program Officer. Our Smart Justice Initiative leverages higher education as a catalytic force for transforming not only the lives of justice-involved individuals, but for the justice system itself. We deeply believe and have experienced for ourselves, as many of us on staff are first-generation college students and graduates, the transformative power of higher education and post-secondary learning. As such, we seek to position education and career pursuits as the most effective reentry intervention. Recently at a Pell Grant Restoration and Future of Higher Education in California Prisons event, Dr. Romarilyn Ralston with Project Rebound said that there's no other reentry model that can produce what higher education does. That's why we need to continue to invest in education and reduce all of the consequences that having a criminal record has, the barriers to opportunities for housing and to employment. In essence, that summarizes our smart justice work at the foundation. And we are just so excited to be here and to join the conversation with Genevieve and Jeffrey. Thank you for having us here.
Thank you, Emily. Genevieve, would you please, how are you doing today first? And could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing?
Hello, I'm doing well. We have sunshine over in Portland, Oregon, so I'm very happy about it. Our work at Dave's Killer Bread Foundation is specifically to work with companies across the country and how to best employ the best person for the job, regardless of their conviction histories. We've been doing this for decades at Dave's Killer Bread, which is the #1 selling sliced organic bread across the country. And we've made mistakes and we've had tremendous success. And about 7 years ago, we realized that this isn't something that companies talked about. Definitely not publicly. And whenever they did, they said, that's really cool that you do that. We could never do that. That there's too many things that would be problematic or wouldn't work. And we said, well, that's actually not true. Let's help you. So we've set out on a journey to really equip companies with the best information, understand how to adopt nuances into their employment practices, and then be able to hire the best person for the job, regardless of that background. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. Appreciate you being here. Jeffrey, could you tell us a little bit about your book? How are you doing today? And could you tell us a little bit about your book?
I'm doing great, partially because the book was released this week. It's the culmination of 7 years of field, 7 years of field research, studying companies that have intentionally sought to exploit this talent pipeline, the 19 million people with felony convictions in the United States, the millions more with misdemeanors, and have seen this population not as a burden, not as something less than full citizens, but rather as a resource for their companies and the economy. And I've studied those companies. I make the business case for this around the country, share the best practices that we've learned from these employers. And I wrote the book in part to help employers understand the reasons to do this, to give them some ammunition to fight, all the internal resistance that inevitably comes up on this topic, and so that they can learn from the mistakes of others and have a great experience with this great population.
Thank you so much for that, Jeffrey. And I think this is important for all of our listeners to understand how important it is to give. When we talk about second chances also include the opportunity for a person to become the best version of themselves. And that includes work, or whether it's creating your own business or having a career, but something that allows you to be able to truly be plugged into society, so to speak, every day. And part of that is work here in this country. And so, Jeffrey, I wanted to ask you, what first got you interested in researching and advocating for fair chance hiring practices?
I came at it purely from a business perspective. Back in 2013, 2014, all the talk in the economic community is how many people weren't in the workforce, who was missing. And I started to look into why they were missing and came to the conclusion that there were 3 social ills at work in that cycle and very much at work today in ways that we haven't seen before: long-term unemployment, the opioid epidemic, and the incarceration recidivism cycle. These are, of course, all intertwined, and came to understand these are more than social ills. They are also major economic problems that the business community has to care about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Jeffrey. Genevieve, Dave's Killer Bread is a well-known second chance employer. What led to the development of Dave's Killer Bread's foundation?
So when I started with the company 11 years ago, we were growing about 40% year over year, which is tremendous growth that we were not prepared for. So we were building the plane as we flew it. And what happened with that is, because of the nature of our work, we often needed to hire people literally overnight in order to train them, create the product, package the product, and distribute the product. And so at that time, we said, who are our best performers? Who are they? How do we find more of them? And what we found is that in most cases, our star performers at that time had this shared experience, and that was that they were formerly incarcerated. We knew that we hired people. We weren't shy about it, but at that time, we had no intentional practice around it. It was really kind of by accident and by referral, and that was it. And that was the moment when we said, okay, well, it's working. Let's lean into that, and let's build innovative recruiting pipelines directly with community-based organizations that serve the reentry part of our community. So that's how the actual intentional practice of second chance employment really kind of got coined and started and going. That was also when we made mistakes and learned, how to find better partners, how to vet these partnerships and build these relationships, and how to better assess candidates, to be quite honest, because not everyone is ready for a job yet. It doesn't mean they won't be, but just because you've returned to the community doesn't mean that you're actually job ready. And so how can we also support the organizations doing that important work? So that really led to the foundation. Once we'd really worked out the kind of bumps and bruises along the way of how this best works, what are those leading practices in second chance employment, we kept getting questions from companies, from competitors, from peers, from people in other industries saying, how do you do this? And that's when we realized we needed to help build kind of a blueprint and be able to explain what those leading practices were and how to leapfrog mistakes, which really led to the foundation being created in 2015 for that sole purpose.
Thank you so much for that, Genevieve. Greatly appreciate it. So just want you to know that Richard Franks just gave you a plug. If you see in the chat, and we highlighted it, he loved Dave's Killer Bread. Got it at Costco after seeing it on Facebook. So just thank you, Frank. Appreciate that. Definitely. So if you're a Costco shopper, you know what to look for the next time you're in Costco. Emily, in what ways does Michelson's 20 MM Foundation support fair chance hiring practices and second chance employment?
I also want to plug Dave's Killer Bread real quick. Definitely have a few loaves of the bread in our cupboards, and just love it, and love that it also supports second chance career education. So super grateful for Dave's Killer Bread work and the foundation's work. At the Michelson 20mm Foundation, to advance smart justice, we invest in program, policy, and systems change initiatives that strengthen higher education in prison, on campus, support for justice-involved students, and pathways to economic success in order to transform the individuals and community impacted by our country's punitive legal system in order to forge brighter, more prosperous futures. That's a mouthful of saying that fair chance hiring, recruiting, retention, promotion, all of it is really essential to the economic prosperity for not only formerly incarcerated candidates, but for our collective economic well-being in the United States, as Jeffrey has begun to illustrate for us. Since Smart Justice was launched at the foundation in 2019, 20MM has invested in fair chance hiring, licensing, and workforce programming, partnering with organizations like Second Call, Root and Rebound, Impact Justice, and of course, the Anti-Recidivism Coalition.
Thank you so much, Emily. I want to share something else for our listeners to just think about it in these terms too. Just monetarily, yesterday was tax day. We have an extension until May, I think it's May 17th. However, take a look at your tax bill and think of it in these terms. Currently in the state of California, our prison system costs us close to $16 billion a year. 16 with a B, billion a year. Now, I was once in that prison system for 24 years, so taxpayers had to pay for me to be in that system, something about between $60,000 and $82,000 a year every year I was in there. Multiply that by 24. Now, imagine how much I'm putting back into the tax base by not being incarcerated, one, and two, by working full time. And so just economically, when we look in terms of what are some of the best things that we can do to make sure that people don't go back to having a hustle or recidivate and have a real chance to actually contribute. And sometimes that's just simply living a life of being able to go to work, make a great salary, and come home and live your life. So just want to think about it. If you just want to think about it only in terms of taxes, because my tax bill was out of this world, and I'm like, how can I lower that? And I think if we decrease the amount of money we put into CDCR, that might be one way. Just my personal opinion. So to everyone, and I'd like to go to Genevieve first. What are some of the false assumptions you've experienced with companies that make about potential employees with conviction histories?
So we have often heard, and it becomes the same concerns over and over, right? That this is going to be a part of the workforce that is presumably more problematic, right? You got in trouble once before, so therefore you must be problematic and will get in trouble again. We know through practice that is not the case. We know that often folks with a conviction history are some of the least problematic in the workplace because they understand what it means to truly have made a mistake, poor choice, or wrong place, wrong time, and what those consequences mean. So we see that this often is a part of our workforce that is more resilient, more loyal, more resourceful, and sticks around for longer. We also hear concerns around, well, clearly this is going to be something where I need to involve attorneys and my insurance broker because we're going to be liable for so much more. Again, that is a falsehood. So when we think about insurance policies in the workplace, we're not insuring the individual in the job. You're insuring the job and then the services and products it produces. So if you hire me, you're not insuring me, Genevieve Martin, you're insuring my position and the controls that that position holds and the responsibilities that that has. And how do you keep that person accountable in those positions? So we talk a lot about that. We bring insurance brokers into that conversation to really debunk all of those things. There are a few scenarios where insurance would be involved, and that's when there's things like personal identification, financial controls, vulnerable populations. And even in those scenarios, there's places where, depending on the conviction, you still may be able to work within that industry. We also hear the biggest one, and I think it's the one that we all have to spend a lot of time on, is not one that's actually based in practice and policy in a professional setting. It's what do we personally believe that someone is possible and capable of doing? So do we believe truly in second chances? Do we believe in this idea of redemption and transformation? If we do, we can work through this conversation and apply this in a professional setting. If we as a person fundamentally believe people don't change or are not respectable enough to be given that chance, that is a completely different conversation, and one we've definitely had to press into before. This work starts at a heart and soul and gut level. And then when we work through that, through empathy building and exposure to individuals that share their stories, that really kind of create air cover for the rest of us, it makes people see, you know what? Anyone can have a background. Anyone. It doesn't matter where you're from, what you look like, what you sound like. We are all very capable of having a conviction history at some point. And that starts to shift that conversation so we can talk about the real things, not just the perceived risk. We can actually get into the actual risk and how to counteract those things.
Thank you so much for that, Genevieve. I want to come to you in one second, Emily, but Lisa Lambert in our chat, great point. So a couple of things. One, usually they have on a federal level what's called the WOTC, the Workers' Opportunity Tax Credit, which is a tax credit of about $6,000 a year that the federal government will pay for actually hiring someone who's formerly incarcerated or a disadvantaged population. Two, in terms of insurance, through the EDD department, you can actually get insurance certification by going through the EDD department. It's actually called, it's been so long. This was my first job. When I first came home, one of my first jobs was to actually recruit employers to hire people that were formerly incarcerated. And so oftentimes what we find is there are certain resources that are available to employers that our employers are not aware of. And so it's actually called bonding. That's what it's called. It's called bonding. It's a form of insurance that the state will supply if necessary. And that might be, for instance, if I worked in a warehouse where and this is not just for formerly incarcerated people, this is often for anyone who works in a warehouse where you might have the storage of high-end jewelry that's going to different locations across the state. So just understand that those opportunities and resources are available for employers if you plug into it. We want to go to you next, Emily, and ask.
Hey, actually, if I could jump in real quickly, Sam, I apologize. Just want to follow up on the work opportunity tax credit, because it's really important. And I know Genevieve and I have talked about this in the past, and that employers utilize that in the right way. Any employer who's going after that just for the tax credit because it gets them really cheap labor is probably not going to have a successful program, because that if all you're motivated by is the cheapest hourly labor, you're not setting up the screening and support processes that really make this a good business proposition. So absolutely use the work opportunity tax credit, because that helps you bolster the kind of training and support that will make this program work. Don't use it as just a cheap employee mechanism. So I apologize for interrupting Emily and Sam.
No, thank you for pointing that out. And in our chat, it's unlimited. It's based on the employees. So Emily, would you like to weigh in on any false assumptions you've experienced with companies about potential employees that have conviction histories?
No, I think our other panelists have really covered the biggest false assumptions are around performance and how a fair chance candidate will perform in a company, and the financial cost assumptions that hiring formerly incarcerated talent may be more expensive when in reality they're more loyal, they reduce the cost of turnover, and they're grateful for the opportunity. And I love Jeffrey's point just on the federal tax credits. To pursue those, really make sure you're doing it with the right intent as a company. And also just to add that they are not necessarily the easiest tax credits, and they're not necessarily the easiest to get into. So you really want to ensure that it's complementing, but you're not the tax credits and benefits.
And often you can find assistance for that through the Workforce Center, the American Job Centers, which are located in every city across the nation. So literally you can find assistance on how to navigate those resources. Jeffrey, anything else you want to add on this particular topic, specifically companies that express or companies that are false assumptions by some companies based on prior conviction histories?
I think the other speakers covered pretty well. I'll just kind of reemphasize, second chance does not mean second rate. Sourced right, supported appropriately, second chance employees are not just another employee. They're not an employee of last resort. They are actually superior employees. And that's a recipe for productivity and profitability for the business owner.
Thank you for that, Jeffrey. Greatly appreciate it. I want to bounce back to you, Genevieve. What are some of the concerns you've heard from companies, or some of the concerns that companies have expressed about employees with conviction histories, and what has been your responses to those concerns?
So when we think about the concerns that employers have, having actual experience and having done this for a very long time, it's easy to say, well, hey, we had an issue with that. Here's how we counteracted it. So for instance, we find that sometimes there's a disconnect in, are we setting clear expectations? Most of the time, we find that this is something that on the employer side, we can fix and we can solve because maybe we aren't clear enough in expectations. Maybe our onboarding process hasn't been robust enough to really help someone that's new to the organization acclimate to our culture and workplace. And so any nuance or shift that we make isn't because we have second chance talent. It's because we as an organization need to fundamentally make nuances and shifts and changes to serve our entire workforce and all new employees. Any change that we would coach a company to do will serve everyone. I'm of the firm belief that if you serve the person with the least, it will end up serving everyone the best. So if we are not looking out for the person that has the least amount of resources, the least amount of wraparound support, or any of the kind of common needs we all have, then we aren't actually doing the best work that we can do. Another one that we talk about is when we're sourcing incredible talent is how are you getting folks? How are you recruiting them and signaling that your company does this with intention and on purpose, not by accident? And so when we think about signaling, how do we show up in the community to show that we do this and not just try to take credit for something that we think sounds flashy, but we don't actually do? Making sure that we're creating pipelines to promotion and career pathways. This should never be just about getting somebody a job. Sometimes it starts that way, but it needs to be about meaningful wages and career paths because everybody needs that. We can't say that, well, most of the population of America needs it, but not this part, because that's not equitable, that's not fair, and that's not inclusive. So our workforce is actually going to be harmed for not having included everyone. I could do this all day, so I'm going to let the other panelists go on.
So, Emily, would you like to weigh in on that? What are some of the concerns that you've heard from companies express about employees with conviction histories, and how have you responded to those?
Yeah, in my previous role at the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce and Unite LA, shout out to my Unite LA fam and David Rattray. We worked with companies to really advance, as a Smart Justice manager, I worked with companies to really advance the fair chance hiring with corporations. And some of the concerns we heard from companies was, oh, this could harm our branding, our reputation in the market, our perception in the market, and also the perceived risk of legal liability, which Genevieve touched on, as well as like insurance, right? Like for any insurance concerns around hiring candidates. So huge myth debunking here around branding and consumer engagement. Many businesses nowadays are embracing fair chance hiring as candidates as a part of their corporate social responsibility, their diversity, equity, and inclusion portfolios, and consumers are responding very positively to this. There's also this like universal understanding now that mass incarceration has been hugely harmful and ineffective at promoting safety in our communities and has been detrimental to communities of color. Employers, companies, corporations, government, public institutions are now having these Black Lives Matter statements and equity commitments, and fair chance hiring is one of the great ways to really stick your statements into action. And the other thing I would say about the insurance concerns, our insurance companies don't typically ask an employer to provide information about the criminal records of their employees, and therefore hiring candidates with records should not be a concern to impact insurance rates.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Emily. Jeffrey, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to the, first of all, I absolutely agree with Emily's points on this. And I even add that it's not just about reputation to consumers, customers, the company. It's also second chance employment really engages existing employees. The biggest cohort in our workforce today nationally are millennials, and they are very engaged in wanting to work for companies that do social good. So it's not just appealing to the customers, it also helps with the engagement of your entire workforce. But I wanted to specifically address about, how employers view backgrounds. And one of the things that I challenge employers on is this concept of, I only want to look at someone with a nonviolent crime. And the reality is the plurality, not quite a majority, but the bigger than any other category of people in prison today are there for crimes of violence. But what I tell employers, and it's a really critical concept, just because you were convicted of a crime of violence committed in the past does not mean you are a violent person today, and very often doesn't mean you were a violent person then. So many convictions come about as the result of young people making bad choices, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it does not speak to their inherent character, nor does it tell you they are irredeemable people. And very often, particularly people who are serving sentences for crimes of violence, have aged out of crime, have had time to reconsider, and never intended to put themselves into that position in the first place. So the message to employers is assume that the crime itself tells you nothing about the person. You have to look at each person and do a true individualized assessment.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I want to give the panelists an opportunity to answer a question in the chat, and I'll go to you first, Genevieve. So the question is, if an employer hires a formerly incarcerated person, their parole officer demands to go to the workplace, will the employer fire them? So the panelists can go first, and I'll speak from experience in this area. So Genevieve, please take that first.
So the short answer is they should not. It doesn't mean that won't happen. This is why second chance employment is critical. As a second chance employer, it means you do this on purpose. It means you've equipped yourself, you've educated yourself, you know who and why you are employing people with convictions because you've done it with intention. It means you know that you might have a parole or probation officer show up at your doors and not to be scared and worried about it. So for instance, at Dave's, there have been countless times I've walked into the lobby, going to my office, and I've seen an officer standing there inquiring about an employee. It's our job as being a contributing member to our community as an employer to work with them and to work with our employees. So we know that our employees are performing well. If they need a minute to check in with their PO, because that's what that PO is requiring in that moment, whether that is realistic, logical, compassionate, or not, we will do that. Now, other employers who haven't taken the time to equip themselves and understand what this means and that it's not a big deal. It's not really a deal at all. This is just a part of making sure we're a part of someone's success story rather than another deterrent to them being successful in the community. Then that employer could get some cold feet because they don't understand what's happening. They don't understand that's actually not a reflection poorly on this employee, and they may find a way to let them go. That's inappropriate. It shouldn't happen, but it will happen as long as we have folks in positions with a lack of information and operating from a place of ignorance rather than a place of information.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. Emily, would you like to weigh in on that question in terms of parole officer wanting to come to the job place, and will the employer or can the employer fire a person for that?
Definitely. So I want to shout out Root and Rebound for the legal implications here. I think that they are really great at supporting and advocating on behalf of fair chance candidates. And this really speaks to the need for parole and probation reform to support employment and higher education. And I just wanted to also kind of highlight some of the Fair Chance ordinances and the Fair Chance Act in California passed in 2018. Key features of the ordinances in California laws require companies to delay a background check until after a conditional offer of employment, and also to conduct an individualized assessment to weigh if the candidate's conviction history has any bearing on the job they are being considered for. This really highlights for a company that you have the best talent and you're willing, it's also about changing your company's culture to make sure that like you're not only just hiring fair chance candidates, but you're retaining and shifting your culture to continue to support and promote fair chance candidates. And so companies that are really dedicated and invested in the success of this in their company, to do it not just for the tugging on the heartstrings and like the, you know, to support formerly incarcerated folks, but also to support the company's bottom line. Yeah, I'll pause there, but yeah.
Right. Thank you so much, Emily. Jeffrey, would you like to add anything?
I'm going to put a different spin on this. I'm going to say that this is an opportunity for an employer. This is based on the best practices I've observed in the marketplace. This is an opportunity for an employer to actually enhance their pipeline. I'll reference one company. It happens to be the subject of the case study chapter of my book, JBM Packaging in Lebanon, Ohio. They hire directly from prisons as well as halfway houses. And what they've learned is to partner with probation and parole offices. And in fact, one of the best calls, if you are, as Genevieve said, an intentional second chance employer, build a relationship with the chief probation and parole officers for your jurisdiction, for that jurisdiction. And they actually appreciate being able to come to the workplace, set up a conference room, make it available to them, make it a easy experience. They may have several clients to meet at one time, which saves them trouble. They get to go to the workplace, and critically, they become a future referral source for the talent pipeline. That's what's happened with JBM. Some of their best new employees have come from referrals from probation and parole officers. So it is a reality. Absolutely agree with Emily. We need probation and or community supervision broadly. Community supervision reform. It's ridiculous what we have, but there will be some component of a second chance workforce that is likely going to be meeting with a probation or parole officer, and you can turn that into a positive for the business as long as you understand and invest that time to understand the situation.
And I'd like to thank you so much for that, Jeffrey. I'd like to add a couple of pieces to this from experience. So I was on parole for 5 years, and what I found was two things. One, I over communicated with my parole officer. Every paycheck I received, I took him the paycheck stub. If I received a promotion, I brought a memo from my employer so that he would know everything that I was doing. It got to the point where he said, "Okay, I know what you're doing. You can just scan an email. You don't have to like set up an appointment." That over communication allowed each one. I actually had 7 parole officers total over a 5-year period. It allowed me to demonstrate, one, I'm working. And so in the period of 5 years, I was only required one time to actually not go to work and go to the parole office first. Each one of my parole officers actually worked around my schedule and would show up at my house with time, either before work or after work, and sometimes literally meeting me there immediately after work, but never really bothered me at the job. So that was one, the over communication by me. And I say that to empower people that are on parole that are formerly incarcerated. The second one, organizations like ARC and many others that assist with employment, be the advocacy communication part. In some instances, if a person does not know how to communicate or does not trust their parole or probation officer, we have case managers or life coaches that we can go to and say, "Can you speak to my parole officer? He's asking me to miss work. How can I navigate this?" And so you have an opportunity to do two things. One, teach the person how to teach that person and empower them on how to communicate with their parole or probation officer. And two, develop a relationship where the probation or parole officer understands that there's an organization that stands by and is supporting this individual. So those are just additional thoughts from experience. Wanted to go back to the chat one more time. Our amazing partner at Bank of America had a question. What's the most critical supports for employers to offer second chance hiring, success, and retention? I think it's a really great question to answer. And so I'll go first again to Genevieve, if you'd like to field that question.
Certainly. So I think it's a great question, and I'm so glad it's being asked, and it sounds like by an employer. First and foremost, I would say this is not work to come to out of a sense of altruism and charity. So first, let's make sure we've lined up of saying we want to hire the best person for the job. This person may have a conviction history, and that's okay. So let's make sure we have those nuts and bolts in place. If you want to go further and do more than just traditional employment, there's a host of things that can be done. But first and foremost, make sure that we have equitable, inclusive practices in our application process, our referral process, our recruiting process, our interview and vetting process. That individualized assessment is critical, and that is when you're going to get the best candidate, or that's when you're going to make mistakes, to be quite honest. So making sure we have that in place. In order to do that, you need training. Just like anything else, you need education and training and information to do well. We've got to start to really work that muscle to get it strong. Once you've done it a few times, it becomes very easy. Be equipped to have uncomfortable conversations. Often folks with convictions are coached to share that they have a conviction, which seems counterintuitive. But when they say, hey, there's this thing that you're going to see on the background check, how do we press into that conversation and make it a meaningful part of relationship building rather than a thing to fear or sidestep or ignore and then not hire the person? So I'd say those are critical needs in the beginning. If you want to go above and beyond, think about how you can support the infrastructure of organizations that serve the reentry population. So we know that housing is tied for first place in how someone will be successful when they return. So it's hard to get a job without housing. It's hard to get housing without a job. So we have this really vicious cycle. So you could help interrupt some of that cycle by pulling together landlords, property management, and helping convince them that this is not something to be afraid of and is actually beneficial for the community. In addition, you can think about additional wraparound supports. So I've worked with many companies where they're located in a kind of odd place where mass transit really doesn't serve them. So how can we tackle transportation in innovative ways? Whether that's credits, whether that's working with community credit unions and getting folks, helping them get, a bike loan or a car loan, things like that, so that they can get there on time every day. Depending on this person's individualized assessment, again, because not all of us are having the same experience, we can think about childcare support. We can think about behavioral health support. Again, all of these things are good for all of our employees. This is not specific to someone with a conviction. This is how do we support our workforce? So we need to think about what are the things they need each day to be successful. So, right, we all need housing. We need to be able to be with our family and be secure. We need to have equal access to food, and we need to have a good job with meaningful wages with a pathway forward for economic success. So think about all those little things that all of our employees will need, and what can we do to further level those up by working with community-based organizations, government agencies, or building them out yourself as an employer if you're ready to take those big next steps.
Thank you so much for that, Genevieve. Emily, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I would definitely like to add to that. I would also say another best practice when onboarding applicants is to not out their conviction history, right? I do think it's a testament of your culture. If someone wants to share and divulge their personal history, it's different if it's coming from an empowered place to own their story versus having to defend themselves to their new colleagues, right? So best practice, don't out someone's conviction history to others on staff. And then I would echo what Genevieve said around supporting full wraparound support services, and to know that you don't have to do that on your own. There's organizations like ARC, like A New Way of Life, and others that can help align with you to ensure that your culture and that your support systems are really on point. And then here's my higher education plug as an employer to really want to get maximize your candidates and your employees highest potential, their unique gifts in the workforce, to create higher education pathways within your company, to support employees with records and without. I think Genevieve mentioned, having higher education pathways supports your entire workforce.
Thank you, Emily. Jeffrey, two questions for you. First one, would you like to add anything? And then I want to.
Well, first of all, I'm struggling because I'm trying to decide who I agree with more, Emily or Genevieve, and I'll just have to split it and agree with them both. I'm just going to add that from a business owner perspective, you need to put someone in charge of helping your workforce navigate these resources. And that can look like all sorts of different things. It can be well-educated supervisors, but it can also be an outside resource brought in. So I'm going to give a shout out to a California company, US Rubber Recycling in Irvine. They're a second chance employer. They hired a life coach. I believe it's a part-time position there, but I know other second chance employers who've made it full-time. Companies like Nehemiah Manufacturing, which is Harvard Business School studies them for second chance employment, has 3 life coaches on staff. So it's not just having the availability of these resources, it's having someone who helps your workforce navigate those resources. And it's actually a very good investment. There's 20 companies in Western Michigan that have actually created an outside service called The Source for this. All the companies contribute to it. They measure the return on this resource for their employees by looking at how much it lowers retention rates. They've come to the conclusion that the investment they make in having essentially a navigator for these resources is better than a 200% return given the cost savings they have.
Okay. So there's a question in the chat about background. So I want to touch on this both from county, city, and state for California. Now it also depends. So I'm well versed in the California laws that cover background checks, and so in California, specifically in Los Angeles, with ban the box. If an employer offers you a position, then they can ask you about your background. If there's a nexus, meaning a connection. Let's say I was a bank robber, and now I'm applying for a job at a small bank. There's a nexus. They're not going to hire me. But let's say I stole a car when I was a teenager or something like that. There's no nexus there. Like, it's not a car dealership. So that's one. 2, what I found oftentimes, and this is one of the things that I want people to really understand, especially my formerly incarcerated people out there. When you fill out a job application, and if on the job application they ask in advance if you've been convicted of a crime, in the state of California, that's illegal, so you don't have to answer it, but do not say no. And the reason why is because there will be a background check probably. And once they do the background check and it comes back that you have a conviction, the reason for terminating you will not be the fact that you have a conviction, but that you lied on the application. If you leave it blank, then you can get into the discussion, well, I know I'm not supposed to answer something that's illegal, and it's illegal to ask me that question, but I'm fine to talk about my history. And here's the way you answer it. Then I want to go to Genevieve on this. Here's the formula that I found has been highly successful when you get into that conversation. 1, you take ownership for whatever you did, whatever your conviction was. And you talk about what you did to make sure that you will never make that mistake again in your life. Whatever work you did while you were in prison. And the third thing you do is you ask that employer, I hope you tell that employer, my hopes and dreams are to be able to be, whether it's a dad, a mom, a great grandfather, whatever it is. And I hope you'll allow me to make my hopes and dreams come through by allowing me to have full-time employment. It's almost impossible not to get a job that way because I've owned what I did. I've demonstrated what I've done the work on to make sure that it doesn't happen again. I've expressed what my hopes and dreams are, and I'm asking you as a human being to support me in making those hopes and dreams a reality. But I want to go to you, Genevieve, to talk about experiences for background checks real quick.
I love what you just said, Sam. When we coach employers on the assessment part, so the interview assessment, when you finally get to that conversation, wherever it is legally allowed in this, what you're looking for in a job candidate is ownership and accountability of their actions, and who are they now? If they can handle those 2 things, I'll hire them every time. If I see scapegoating, if I see, well, that wasn't me, it was my cousin, whatever, that person's not ready yet. It's just the simple truth. Now, when talking about the comment that came up around you get hired, you get the job, then they do the background check, and then they're let go. This happens all the time. So as a job candidate, as the employee, you have the ability to then basically, you get an adverse action letter saying, we did the background check, this no longer works, we can't hire you, which many employers, especially the ones that have high turnover or low wage kind of entry level jobs, will let the person start working before they've completed the entire assessment phase. So I would say that is not a leading practice, and that is something we're working to change in companies, number one. Number two, when that adverse action is taken, you as the job candidate and or employee can actually rebut that. So you have a very limited period of time to be able to go back and say, here, I'd like to see my report, because chances are the report also may be incorrect. As we all know, if you have a common name, your background check may not actually be the correct one. So you have the chance to review it, and you have the chance to explain it. So just like Sam said, take ownership and accountability for it, explain who you are now, and then help that employer see that that conviction has nothing to do with the job that they decided you were a good fit for. They did interview you, they did assess you, and they decided they wanted you. So remind them of that. So there are great ways to do that. I would imagine ARC can support job candidates through that. Sorry if you don't yet, but hey, now you will. There are ways to do this, and I've seen a number of employees manage to retain their job because they took the time to do this. It's exhausting. You shouldn't have to, but that is currently the reality of this situation. Is uneducated and unequipped employers will continue to make very flawed decisions until these leading practices have made it all the way across the country into every single company, which is going to take us a minute. So take that time to rebut it, show who you are, remind them why they wanted to hire you in the first place. And if you really have to, have another outside organization like an ARC, like a life coach, maybe even your probation or parole officer if you're under community supervision, help kind of bolster that and say, yep, I stand by all of these things that this individual has said. They're a good fit for this position. We'll help you reconsider. Often the company will reconsider. Sometimes they won't. And in that case, you don't want to work for that person. You don't want to work for that company if they're not going to take the time to listen and hear you out and go, you know what? You're right. This doesn't line up. Welcome aboard.
Thank you so much for that, Genevieve. Jeffrey, want to come to you. Your new book, Untapped Talent, explores how hiring formerly incarcerated employees benefit the employer and the company as a whole. Can you tell us how so?
Well, the bottom line is we are running into a talent shortage in the United States. It's hard to feel that in the midst of the pandemic when we have elevated unemployment, but we're already seeing the future. I just spoke on a radio station in Iowa. Their unemployment rate's down to like 3.5% or 3%. I got my third communication in 3 weeks from employers in Indiana who can't find workers and want to explore this. So talent hunt is heading our way. Some of this is driven by demographics. The baby boomers are leaving the workforce. The millennials are all in. And we didn't have that many births after the millennial birth boom. Our fertility rates are below our replacement rate. So we're heading to a talent shortage in this country. So that means that employers have to dig deeper into the population to find people who can be great employees. And the most, the model I recommend in the book of find people, essentially have a process to find people who are ready and then make sure they thrive, would kind of work with any population, except that most of those populations are already well known. So, that's not going to work hiring from Harvard Business School. But here's this great population of people who are underutilized. So it's simply going to have the workers you need to serve your customers, to grow your business. But then there's also the public, as talked about before in our conversation, the public wants to do business with companies that are doing societal good, and employees want to work for employers that are doing societal good. And one last point is I found that the spirit of innovation that supports second chance hiring becomes kind of infectious in a company, and the companies that undertake this suddenly become more innovative in other ways. And it's a really exciting thing for companies to do and seems to benefit them on so many levels.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. I want to go to you, Emily. Outside the corporate world, what are some of the employment fields where conviction histories hinder employment opportunities?
Ooh, great question, Sam. I would say government and public institutions. So, for example, LA County has advanced fair chance hiring as one of the largest employers in the county. additional government institutions can really learn from what LA County has really advanced with fair chance hiring. And then for public institutions, I wanted to plug another grantee of 20MMs. The Campaign for College Opportunity released the Possibility Report from Prison to College Degrees in California earlier this year. And that report really highlights the unique needs and experiences of formerly incarcerated scholars persisting and succeeding in their higher education journeys. Shout out to the report's author, Danny Murillo. And I just wanted to touch upon the public institutions here, as the report focuses on its recommendations on 5 common themes. One of the themes that always comes up is employment. And in the employment section, the report highlights dual struggle students with records face. One, finding a job with a conviction history, and balancing the need to work while attending school. So a common or a solution to each of these is to get a job on campus. But students often experience stigma, the same stigma that they're experiencing in the corporate world, on campus too. And so the policy recommendations in the report really center on campuses, public institutions, our public universities and college campuses, in supporting having their institutions of higher education's HR teams really learn best practices in fair chance hiring, learn not just the ordinances and the laws, state laws that they're required to just comply with, but take it a step further to really live out our values of equity as institutions of higher education and create the culture that's really going to support scholars to thrive on campus, which is including hiring and retaining them with jobs. One of the other recommendations that is more of a larger policy recommendation is to familiarize themselves with the federal work study opportunities and really prioritize those opportunities for justice-involved scholars.
Thank you so much for that, Emily. Genevieve, I have a question for you. In what ways does the Dave Killebread Foundation work with companies to educate and empower them to hire formerly incarcerated employees?
So we offer a few things, and we have something launching in the next couple of months. So the way we do this work, one is through the Second Chance Corporate Cohort. This is an 8-week curriculum where we put a group of companies together and they send 3 participants through our curriculum. That spans Second Chance Employment 101 to how to find allies and stakeholders to help drive this work internally within their organization. It helps them manage change management, understand equity in action, how to craft communications, how to interview and assess candidates, and a boatload more. By the end of this program, each company has co-created their own implementation plan for the work ahead, which is incredibly powerful to witness and watch. We do one-on-one consulting. This is generally with much larger companies that need to dig into the weeds in specific areas. And so we really sit with them, hold their hand, challenge those assumptions that we've been talking about on this call, and get into it with their teams. In addition, we have done workshops. We've hosted reentry simulations pre-COVID when we could all be together. And then later this spring, early summer, we're launching the Second Chance Accelerator, which guides folks at their own pace through a program that's kind of a condensed version of our curriculum. In this one, they don't get hand-holding, they're on their own, but it's really to kind of bone up on this work quickly. And then later this year, we'll be launching an online community of practice for all Second Chance employers and professionals that need to continue to have support, learn from one another, share their experiences, and be able to kind of crowdsource resources across the country.
Thank you so much for that, Genevieve. We're going to go to closing now, but before we do it, I want the audience to please take note of something. Oftentimes, we call this second chance opportunities. And what I've found is oftentimes these are not second chances, but literally the first chance a person has had to really live the best version of their life. If you go to places that are under-resourced, from my personal experience, such as South LA, Boyle Heights, East Los Angeles, if you look at the schools and you just look at the communities, you'll see that these are not places where our children actually have a first real fair chance to thrive and like be the best version of themselves. And so when we say second chance hiring, that may be a phrase because a person is coming out of incarceration. And so we frame it as that, or we label it as that. But understand that oftentimes this is literally the first chance that a person has had to become the best version of themselves, with your support. And I'm speaking specifically to fair chance hiring employers out there. So please take that into consideration. You'll find that you'll come across some incredible human beings that just need an opportunity to thrive. Now, with that, I'd like to go to Emily for closing thoughts to our audience.
So I want to say, for anybody in the audience that's interested in advancing fair chance hiring in your company, at your organization, at your public institution, in government, to connect with ARC's Fair Chance Hiring campaign and Dave's Killer Bread Foundation's trainings and workshops. I know Dave's Killer Bread facilitates the Second Chance Business Coalition, which is another great learning opportunity, and get Jeffrey's book. I think all of us in the fair chance world are really excited about this book and excited for the systems change that is going to follow and come as a result of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. Genevieve, take a minute for last thoughts for our audience.
This is very practical, doable, possible work. You're going to find some of the best employees you've ever had. And for the employees that find these employers that have done the work, they've done the hard work, they've done the policy work, and they're being inclusive, you're going to finally find a home that accepts you for all of you, where you can bring your whole self to work and not just a piece of you. And I think that's critical for every human being. Our lives are messy and interconnected. We need to be able to show up and know today's a harder day than yesterday, or tomorrow might be. And so when we find these places where we can really thrive, that's really, really special and profound. And I hope that all of us together over the coming years can build more and more of those ecosystems and companies together. Thanks for having us today.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. Jeffrey, last thoughts for our audience.
Well, gratitude for Emily for mentioning the book, so I don't have to, although it is over my back shoulder on the bookshelf, shamelessly. But I think it's important for employers to understand that this is not an all or none proposition. You do not have to be outside the gates of a correctional institution with job applications or not do it at all. There are intermediate steps. I've always referred to those as bridging the box, and they include essentially education. Start by going out to visit employers who are making this work. Visit nonprofits like Dave's Killer Bread Foundation. Talk to them, see how they can partner, how ARC can help you develop a talent pipeline and support that talent pipeline. Start, if you happen to be in a state that is a ban the box state, take the box off and get a real look. And even if you're in a ban the box state, if there's a review, put a line of business person on that review committee. Don't leave it just to someone who may feel their career interests are always aligned with saying no. Ask your HR professionals to get the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM's, Getting Talent Back to Work certificate. It's free, helps along with the education process. So keep in mind, you don't have to dive in, you can test the waters. And what I believe you'll find is as you explore this, you'll find more and more appeal to taking this on.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, and thank you all for joining. Thank you for our panelists. Thank you for joining. Thank you for sharing this knowledge with our viewers, and thank you for the work that you do. And so I want to thank everyone who joined our show today. If you're a company interested in how you can be a fair chance employer, please reach out to ARC's workforce staff, Carmen Meeks or Melissa Shumsky, to schedule training. Vivian will highlight all of the information. There you go, right there, the information. For next week, we're going to talk about what's going on in our nation today. I watched a video of Adam Toledo last night, the child that was killed by the police in Chicago, 13 years old. And I immediately thought, on the 29th of this month, my oldest grandson will turn 13. We also have the trial of Derek Chauvin will be in the hands of the jury next week. And then we also have Dante White, who was just killed by the police. And this is heavy. It's heavy and it's hard for me to even talk about it. But we're going to be discussing these things. I'm not sure who our guests will be, but this is something, one, I want our African-American community to know that this lies heavy within the heart of this organization and me as a leader, and our young people, for people like young Adam, who we don't know what his future would hold had he lived beyond days ago. And so I just want you to know we're going to be discussing that next week, and we have to figure out a way to change this. This can't keep going. It has to end. It's got to be something that can change, because we must be greater than that. And so I hope you all tune in next week for this discussion. Until then, take care, God bless, and stay safe.